The Lost Track of Time by Paige Britt. Chapter 5. The Story of the Great Moodler. Once upon a time, so long ago, I don't remember when, the Great Moodler was known far and wide for being exactly that, a great moodler. When most people moodle, they come up with a few ideas, but not the Great Moodler. She came up with real possibilities. First, she would moodle on the smallest, faintest notion. Soon, it would blossom into an idea. With constant moodling, her ideas took flight, soaring overhead and colliding with one another until sparks flew. From the sparks, her ideas caught fire, streaking into the sky and exploding with possibilities. In those days, possibilities fell to the ground like rain. Each one was a brilliant bit of light etched with a message. "It's a possibility," people would say whenever they found one, and, if they liked what it said, they'd pop it into their mouths and chew on it. Everyone was full of possibilities in those days, full to the point of bursting. Most possibilities were quite ordinary, such as, "Tomorrow it will rain." But some were intriguing and delicious, such as, "There's a man in the moon," or "You can fly." People loved these possibilities the most. Whenever someone discovered one, rather than chew on it, they would sit right down and consider it. When they did, the possibility would grow. Sometimes it grew a little bit, and sometimes a lot. But on the average, most possibilities were about the size of a watermelon. One night, the Great Moodler had trouble sleeping. She got out of bed and stared up at the stars, moodling on the mysteries of life. When she did, a tiny possibility began to take shape. Even though it was very small, it was brighter and more beautiful than anything ever seen. It was like a sliver of the sun, so dazzling the night around it turned to day. When the possibility took flight, people woke from their dreams and rushed outside to see what it was. They stared up in awe at the brilliant possibility, waiting for it to fall to the ground so they could consider it. But instead of falling, it streaked across the heavens like a meteor and disappeared from view. Everyone was crushed. What was this possibility? What did it say? The very next day, explorers set out to find it. Because it was lost in some distant land, they called the treasure they were seeking the remote possibility. For years, explorers trudged across deserts, slogged through swamps, and hacked their way through jungles, but the remote possibility was never found. One by one, the explorers gave up their search, and the remote possibility moved from memory into legend. One explorer, though, never gave up. He climbed up the highest mountains and down the deepest valleys in all 4 directions. When the remote possibility remained hidden, he searched harder and farther, traveling into the forgotten corners of the world. One day, while tramping through a rocky wasteland, surrounded by nothing but the dust and debris of a long-dead volcano, the explorer saw a glimmer on the ground up ahead. He was hungry and thirsty, and his vision was blurred from exhaustion, but the light refused to fade. Was it a mirage? Or had he finally found what he'd been searching for? "Anything is possible," he told himself, and pushed on toward the light. As he drew closer, the faint glimmer became a glow. "Anything is possible," he said again, putting one exhausted foot in front of the other. The light grew brighter still, turning the pebbles into shadow, into diamonds. Once the treasure was finally within reach, the explorer bent down to pick it up. When he did, he let out a cry, for etched in the light were his very own words. "Anything is possible." The explorer knew his search was over. The remote possibility had been found. He set off for home immediately, carrying his discovery with him. When he reached the border of the wasteland, he met a group of travelers. He shared the remote possibility with them, and as he did, the possibility began to grow. In this in of itself wasn't strange. That's what possibilities did. The strange thing was how much it grew, and grew, and grew. In just a matter of moments, it was the size of a bush, and then a boulder. "I can't believe it," said one of the travelers. "Anything is possible, I suppose," said another, and they all had to agree it was true. The proof was right in front of them. By now, the remote possibility was much too big for the explorer to carry, so he sent the travelers for help. But when help arrived, they had never seen a possibility so large and immediately began to consider it themselves. Of course, when they did, it grew even larger. Soon it was the size of a hill. Word spread rapidly, and more people flocked to the wasteland. "Anything is possible," they would say when they saw the glittering mound of light. Up, up, up. The remote possibility grew bigger still until it was taller than the tallest mountain and wider than the sea. By now, the possibility was so large that people began to wonder what to do with it. Should they climb it? Dance around it? Chip it into pieces? They had no idea, but they knew someone who would. The Great Moodler. The Great Moodler was a very gifted problem solver. It didn't matter if it was a big problem, like how to build a bridge or a bridge to a rainbow, or a little problem like how to catch a cricket. The Great Moodler would come up with a solution. But when she saw the remote possibility, even she was overwhelmed. She moodled all day and all night. Hundreds of tiny notions streamed from her head, and ideas bounced back and forth, but no real possibilities formed. So she moodled away the next day, and the next night, too. Finally, after a week of almost constant moodling, a great idea began to take shape. Everyone held their breath, watching as she turned the idea this way and that. Suddenly it spun into the air and exploded with possibilities. The crowd cheered, and the Great Moodler stood to announce her solution. "This is what you must do with the remote possibility," she shouted. The crowd grew silent, waiting for the answer. "Live with it!" Everyone was stunned. This wasn't the answer they were expecting, but the more they considered it, the more it made perfect sense. The remote possibility was so wonderful, so beautiful, they should build their lives around it, and that's what they did. The Great Moodler quickly built a home on top of the gleaming mountain of light. She named the land in all 4 directions the Realm of Possibility. At the foot of the mountain, the people created a city that was beautiful beyond belief. The buildings were curvaceous and fanciful, and went straight up into the clouds. The roads were long and winding, and always followed the scenic route. People planted fruit trees along the highways to encourage musing and munching on the way to wherever. The city sat on one side of the remote possibility, and the wasteland, where it had been found, sat on the other. The wasteland, however, was no longer a wasteland. The rocks and boulders bloomed in the light of the remote possibility and became grand mountains in their own right. These mountains were no ordinary mountains. Instead of being gray or brown, like you might expect, they were blue, orange, green, pink, yellow, every color of the rainbow. People called them the Range of Possibilities, and climbed their heights to reach the sun. The realm was a peaceful, beautiful place until one day a stranger came walking down the road. He carried nothing with him except a mysterious black book and a golden pocket watch. His name was Kronos, and he had come to the realm to make his mark. Kronos immediately built himself a giant home made of concrete and steel. He called his home, which was really more of a fortress, the Timely Manor. It held 24 rooms, 1 for each hour in the day. The rooms were dark and windowless and filled with ticking clocks. The outside walls were topped with a parapet, where grim-faced clockworkers marched day and night. No one knew exactly where the clockworkers had come from, but one thing for sure, they lived to serve their master. The manor surrounded a central courtyard from which a tremendous clock tower rose. The tower had 4 clocks, one for each direction of the compass. Kronos was a proud man, and he soon became jealous of the great Moodler's place of importance. He believed the realm was overrun with useless daydreamers, and the remote possibility was nothing but a silly notion. He would often stand on the parapet and read aloud from his black book, shouting down to the people in the streets below. The book was filled with time-saving tips and words to live by, but most people ignored them. This made Kronos furious, so he came up with a plan. In those days, the clock tower was a novelty, and no one paid it much mind. Everyone was too busy moodling to keep track of time, and why should they? There was time enough for everyone. People took as much as they needed and never worried about wasting it. Many had time to spare and would share it with anyone who asked. There's no time like the present, and there's no present like time, they'd say, and they'd give away minutes, hours, even days to those in need. Kronos challenged all that. Every day he ordered his clockworkers to wind the clocks in the tower, and every day time would run out. People began to watch the clock, first out of curiosity, and then in alarm. Time was slipping away. Soon people began to fight among themselves. "Take your time, leave mine alone," they argued. Neighbors accosted neighbors, demanding borrowed time back. What little time was left at the end of the day was heavily guarded lest it be stolen. It didn't take long before people turned to Kronos for answers. They gathered at the manor and demanded an explanation. "Where has all the time gone?" Kronos was prepared. "I'll tell you where it went," he roared, pointing to the great Moodler's home on top of the remote possibility. "It's being wasted by that useless Moodler and by you." This time he pointed an accusing finger at the crowd. "You are killing time with all your moodling. If you want more time, you must do as I say, immediately." This got everyone's attention. "Killing time?" they said to one another. "How horrible! This must stop at once." They listened closely as Kronos explained his plan. "The more possibilities you consider, the less likely you are to accomplish anything. And the fewer things you accomplish, the more time you waste. Therefore, the quickest way to make the most of your time is to limit the possibilities." The people looked up at the clock tower in alarm. Sure enough, Kronos was right. Time was running out. There wasn't a minute to waste. Kronos appointed 12 of his most efficient clockworkers to a committee devoted to making every second count. The first thing the committee did was visit the great Moodler and demand she stop coming up with new possibilities. "We have quite enough already," they scolded her. Next, they decided to consider the possibilities they did have and throw out the ones that were a waste of time. After sifting through millions and millions of possibilities, they came up with a master list of 3,763. They passed an amendment to change anything is possible to 3,763 things are possible. But they didn't stop there. Even that wasn't enough to save time, so they limited the possibilities even further, and as they did, the list became smaller. 2,631 and smaller. 1,612 and smaller. 497 and smaller still, until it was decided 217 things are possible. Anything struck from the list was deemed impossible and declared illegal. Kronos established a court to prosecute time wasters and turn the clock tower into a prison. With only 217 things possible, everyone knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing and when. In gratitude for his efforts to save time, The committee named the great city at the heart of the realm after their leader. They called it Kronos City. Before long, the city outgrew its borders. As it grew bigger and bigger, it grew uglier and uglier. The clockworkers shaved the ornamentation off the buildings, cut down the trees, and straightened the roads, all in the interest of efficiency. The odd thing was, however, that no matter how much time people saved, there never seemed to be enough left over. The more things got done, the faster time ran out. Whether people were winding up or winding down, the clocks in the clock tower were always ticking. Soon the realm was full of clocks. People carried them in their pockets, wore them on their wrists, and hung them on every wall. Before long, everyone's internal clock, the clock that told them when to do things in their own time, was completely drowned out. "There's no such thing as an internal clock," scoffed Kronos. "Has anyone actually ever seen one?" People had to admit that no one ever had, whereas the clocks in the tower were undeniably real. Before long, people stopped even trying to check their internal clocks. They doubted they had ever had such a thing. As doubt took hold in their minds, a dark shadow gathered in the sky. At first, it was nothing more than a mist hanging over the city, a slight haziness, really. People hardly noticed it was there, but the more the clocks dictated people's every move, when to rise, when to eat, when to sleep, the darker the shadow grew. The shadow was darkest right above the tower, forming an impenetrable lid over the city. Before Kronos had arrived, every day had a rhythm, and the sun, the moon, and stars kept the beat. Now there was no sun, moon, or stars to be seen. The shadow had taken the place of the sky. That's when the great Moodler disappeared. "High time," said some, who were glad to see her go. "Better late than never," the others said philosophically. "It was only a matter of time," advised the committee smugly. Everyone had an opinion about where she'd gone. Some said she was banished. Others said she was lost in her own thoughts and couldn't find her way out. No one knew for sure. Either way, she was never seen again. See you soon for Chapter 6.